Disclaimer, this video is mainly made for my Vtuber friend Corvus, who will be debuting alongside me. Of course, anybody can watch it because it's publicly on YouTube. But the point is, I am only making this video because I have made around 4 functioning models in the past and they wanted a little bit of advice. Also, this video is roughly divided into 2 parts, that being the character sheet part and the model part. Now onto the requirements. For the character sheet, you can use any drawing software on any device you like. For the actual model, which is the piece of data that is going to be moving, I recommend using a laptop or a PC. A lot of people already know why, but Vtuber models are at least, like the bare minimum for Vtuber models, is around 30 to 40 layers. This isn't too bad for some mobile devices like a newer iPad. However, for most models that are either bigger in size, have a lot of detail, or are drawn in a more realistic art style, not working on a PC can be a huge limitation. Let's say your model is larger in size and ends up with around 200 layers. I'm sure you can already tell where I'm going with this. At some point your tablet is going to start lagging and overheating. Drawing in details or even straight lines at some point becomes a huge hassle, so I do recommend working on a PC, at least when it comes to the model. But before you jump to conclusions and install a random drawing software on your PC for the actual Vtuber model, you have to make sure that your drawing software on your PC has the option to turn drawings into PSD files. PSD files stands for Photoshop data, but that doesn't mean you have to use Photoshop. If anything, I recommend using anything other than Photoshop. Not to worry, most softwares can do that by this point, but apparently, and this is really confusing to me as well, some drawing programs don't have PSD files that are compatible with Live2D, which is the software that makes all the movement of a Vtuber model possible in the first place, which, you know, could be a potential problem. So I do recommend looking up whether your preferred drawing software is compatible with Live2D in the first place. If anybody needs any recommendation, I'd recommend using Medibang Paint Pro. It is for the most part completely free and has all the features you would need for a model. Link is in the description. And at the very end you would of course need Live2D, which again makes any of this moving thing possible in the first place. You can get it for free, but there's definitely a lot of limitations. For instance, they will limit your canvas size, meaning even models that are large as PSD data will be shrunken down into 1280 by 720 pixels, and you also get other limitations like the kind of layers you can use. Which does make sense, they need to make some cash. So if you plan on zooming in on your models like a lot of ASMR channels do, I do recommend actually paying them. And don't worry, this is not a sponsor. You definitely don't have to pay them if you don't care too much for the limitations. Just make sure to remember that you only have 40 days with the free version of Live2D. Now with all of our tools out of the way, we can actually start designing our Vtuber model. For my design aspect, I start with a rough character sheet. At this point you don't have to worry about body parts, but I do recommend having a canvas size of at least 1980 by 1080p in case you want to show your character sheet at your debut stream. Now onto our genres. Not the dirty kind of genres, get your head out of the gutter. Before I start any Vtuber project, I usually think of a world building genre that I want to implement into my character design. For instance, I chose a cyberpunk or sci-fi aesthetic for my world building and combined an old Japanese folklore, that being an Oni, because I'm basic as hell, into my character design. If anybody is lost on what sort of concept they'd like to have, I recommend thinking of the kind of content you'd like to do as a Vtuber and basing it off of that. If you are more on the sensitive side, go ahead. Show off your titties, have fun. I don't think there's a stigma or anything against that. So yeah, go for it. Do it! Now with your concept out of the way, I am going to say something that might stir a pot or two. But I don't think character design philosophy applies to Vtuber characters. You don't have to have a subtle or practical aspect to your design. Mostly Vtuber models are there to have a visual appeal and not necessarily to tell a story. Of course, you can go for the storytelling variation for your Vtuber design. This isn't to say that I'm against it. I love Arcane's more subtle character design, but for VTubing, that subtlety just isn't necessary. TLDR, I recommend going for a cool trope or a subversion, maybe a good silhouette, and a solid color palette. And silhouette is actually quite important, to the point where Gintama made a whole section of it. Here it is in all of its glory.
いいか、例えばこの銀太さんをシルエットにしてみよう。ほら見ろ、これ何の特徴もねえだろ。シルエットだけで見分けがつくくらいじゃねえと少年漫画はやっていけねえんだよ。
So yeah, I hope you get my point. If you want a little bit like of an example, I'd say Ina from Whole Life EN is just fucking amazing. She has an extremely memorable silhouette and is basically recognizable from everywhere. Ina also has a really solid color palette. Her color palette consisting of dark purples, blues and oranges. Blue and orange being complementary colors is bound to look good together. But her color also invokes a feeling of mystery and coziness because of a fancy thing called color psychology. For your colors, I'd recommend using guidelines like the 60-30-10% rule. These rules are pretty simple. You limit your color palette to 3 colors, excluding your skin tone. One of those 3 colors is going to be used for roughly 60% of the design, another color for 30%, and the last color for 10%, hence the name. This of course is just a recommendation for people that don't know where to start with colors, and you can use the 60-30-10% rule with the aforementioned color psychology to make a more customized color palette. So with all of that out of the way, here is how I designed my own model. Again, my concept is sci-fi only, so yeah. I used Procreate to design myself digitally. I think Procreate is just extremely easy to use, and having a character sheet that is digital is easier to import into your model later on, so I recommend doing your character sheet digitally. I started out with a rough silhouette and incorporated basic shape language. Of course, you don't have to do this, but since I'm a nerd and I have my own platform now, I can bombard you with information. So, shape language tells you what shapes communicate what feelings and impressions. Circle stands for charisma and kindness, rectangles for reliability and stability, and triangles for danger and risk. I then think about what kind of clothes I like from that universe. I chose a bomber jacket to fill out the circle shape of my torso and kept adding clothes and references. And yeah, references are actually like a really good conversation starter point. Like, it sounds like I'm trying to justify me making another Gintama reference, which is true, but I legitimately think it's a nice icebreaker to start a conversation. And you know how I talked about like silhouettes and how they are like extremely important? You might have thought, oh, he probably did something interesting with it. I didn't. I completely forgot about that, and I didn't do shit with the whole silhouette thing. So it kind of looks boring.
Who's that Pokemon? It's
A very boring silhouette. When it comes to the colors, I decided to follow the 60-30-10% rule that I talked about. I did, however, add 2 more colors because, like I said before, it is a pretty limiting thing to follow in general. So I added 2 more neutral colors to my color palette, and I think it ended up looking pretty neat. I also recommend using this tip where you turn your colors into black and white. What it does is it shows the values, so basically the contrast between your colors, and as far as I know, the more contrast there is to a specific place, the more likely a person is going to get their eyes drawn to that place. So this is getting really spicy now because we're moving on to the model aspect. Everything is coming together really nicely. So there was a small section of the script where I was trying to explain how a Vtuber model is even made. It's on screen right now, you can read it if you want, but I realized that it's extremely hard to understand what I'm even trying to communicate. So I just made like a small doll, right, that's supposed to be similar to how Vtuber models work, and I tried to film it. The end result ended up looking like torture footage from a serial killer. Enjoy. So I recorded that footage without even knowing what these kind of dolls are even called. They're named articulated paper dolls, and they are made out of paper. Isn't that crazy? But the point is that they're made out of layers of paper that are put on top of each other and connected via these pins, which makes the paper dolls be able to bend their limbs because they are separated into multiple layers and connected via pins. My genius metaphor being that Vtuber models work the same way. The layers of papers are the layers of a model, the pins and the movements stand for Live 2D. And if you already have a little bit of background knowledge about VTubers, you probably know that in order to make those movements, you have to draw more of a layer than you could see without the movement. God, this is complicated. Basically, if you want to have movement in your character, for instance, let's say you move your hair around, you will see the back of your hair as well, compared to like a 2D picture that doesn't move, if that makes any sense. Now, with that knowledge in our brains, I recommend making a memo of how you want to move and what kind of movements require what body parts to be separated from each other. You can move your own body if certain movements confuse you. I've done it plenty of times, and if people still have trouble with that, you can separate your character sheet's body parts with a lasso tool, for instance, and then you can move them around with a few tools that are probably part of your drawing app. You can also do this to my demo Vtuber model in case you're curious. It is really just made for experimentation and getting people to try out new things, so modify it however you want. If you still want a basic example for separating body parts, here is a basic list that I've created in order to help some people out. We'll start out with the bangs, which are the highest layers, then we go down to the side hair, nose, eyebrows. We've got the eyes that are separated into the upper eyeliner, eyelashes, bottom eyeliner. We've got the top eyelid, bottom eyelid, highlight, pupil, iris, and at the very end we have the white of the eyes. Now we can take a look at the mouth. We've got the upper lip and lower lips, basically hiding the upper teeth, lower teeth, and the inside of the mouth. Then we have our blank face, ears, back of the head, neck, torso, back of the neck, arms, crotch, feet, and at the very last we have our legs. Let's move on to the actual making of our Vtuber model. Here's how I did it. I created a new file using medibang Paint, which is my preferred drawing software. Again, please look up if you can use your software with Live 2D, and made a canvas size that is 3500 pixels by 1800 pixels, which might sound like a lot to the average Joe, but I don't recommend choosing the same canvas size as me. Yes, it does look fine zoomed out, but nobody uses their model completely zoomed out like a lunatic. So I recommend going for maybe around 4000 pixels. Now what I do is I use the character sheet for tracing. So I recommend not straight up like using assets from other people, because that's just plagiarism and not good. This is also why it's nice to have an interesting pose for your character sheet if you're trying to trace off of it. I would also recommend adjusting the proportions and cleaning up the sketch at this point so that the line art process doesn't become a hassle like mine did. So here is a brief overview of my workflow when it comes to drawing my Vtuber model. I'll start out by picking a random body part, usually the head, and draw or trace off the line art of my character sheet. Depending on how clean it is, this process can be extremely easy or hard, so I do recommend cleaning up your sketch quite a bit because, man, I struggled with this a lot. So here's what my layers look like at this stage of the model. For each part I have a line art layer that's on top of a color layer, and I put them inside of a folder and name that folder after the part. And at this point I just don't really care too much whether it looks pretty or not. The model just needs to contain all of those body parts that I'm looking for. That sounds illegal, that sounds like a trade, like a black market trade. Doesn't matter. Basically, I just want to make sure that I have drawn everything, even if it looks crude. And then I go into my second process, which is actually rendering and coloring everything properly in. And here's a few tips from your good old pal to make this phase of the project easier. The first one being to use the tools of your drawing software to your advantage. For instance, mirror tools. This is self-explanatory. You can use mirroring tools for parts that are symmetrical and parts that are on both sides of your body. I don't know about other drawing softwares, but medibang Paint has this pencil called the mirror pencil. And what it does, it basically mirrors your pencil in real time. So it's pretty similar to using two pencils at the same time. Of course, you can use copy and paste anytime as well. Tip number 2, if you have a drawing tablet, I know you have one, Corvus, make use of all the buttons it has to offer. You can basically assign shortcuts on your drawing software to those buttons, and it's super handy to use. And trust me, you're going to spam Ctrl Z throughout all of this process, so you might as well make it easier to use commands. Tip number 3 is a pretty stupid one, and I just made this mistake, but I want to warn people about it, so here we are. If you can't use the bucket tool everywhere because not all parts have closed line knot, just close the gap of the line knot on a different layer so you can use the fill tool. Don't make the mistake that I made, where I decided to color in everything by hand. While there wasn't a lot of contrast with the white background and my silver jacket, you'll only start seeing these holes once you start drawing in some detail or move your model around, so please be aware of that. My 4th tip is to use as many references as possible. I think this is pretty clear cut and pretty normal. Pinterest is of course a great source of references, and I actually recommend using 2D anime style pictures. For me it's easier to translate those into my drawings rather than 3D pictures, but yeah, use references. And this is my final tip, I'm just going to shut up after that. When adding details, make sure that the layers that are supposed to be connected look like they're connected even if they're on different layers. For instance, we've got like wrinkles on a piece of clothing, and you want to make sure that even if they are separated into multiple layers, that they kind of look like they could be connected and they don't look all jagged. And at this point I recommend just saving as much as possible. Any progress that's lost is just painful to your psyche and to my psyche as well. It's like an emotional attack. And if you're nervous about accidentally deleting your progress or your whole data, make a backup of your model. I think that's just the easiest way to go about it. This is the last step. All you gotta do is turn each body part into a layer each and saving the model. Once you're done with that, congratulations, you've made it through hell. Not completely, because you still have to deal with Live 2D, but so do I. We might as well suffer together, so subscribe if you feel like watching the Live 2D tutorial that I'm going to make as well. Yeah, that was really corny. I surprisingly only ended up with 111 layers. I expected way more than that. But the same goes for the amount of hours that went into this project, which weirdly enough was only 25 hours, which is still confusing to me, but I guess that happens. I am personally super happy with how my model turned out, and that is one hell of a thing to say because I'm an artist and also a perfectionist. Anyways, I hope you came out of this thinking the same for your model as well. I will be streaming more difficult games on Twitch, including Fear and Hunger on my debut stream, which is going to be so fun, so please come by if you feel like having a crisis with me. では、ご視聴ありがとうございます。鬼の梅でした。さよなら。